Welcome to the session on functions and graphs. Y equals modulus of f of x and y equals f of modulus of x. The objectives for this session are to sketch the graphs of y equals mod f of x and y equals f of mod x. In order to sketch the graph of y equals mod f of x, first sketch the graph of y equals f of x. Next, reflect the parts where f of x is less than 0 in the x-axis. And finally, delete the parts below the x-axis. Also, in order to sketch the graph of y equals f of mod x, begin by sketching the graph of y equals f of x for x greater than or equal to 0. And then reflect this in the y-axis. So let's illustrate a graph of y equals mod f of x. Suppose this is our y equals f of x, and we've sketched it as shown. In order to sketch y equals mod f of x, reflect the parts where f of x is less than 0 in the x-axis, as shown here and here. And finally, delete the parts below the x-axis, as shown here. And now for y equals f of mod x. Here's our graph of y equals f of x. Begin by sketching the graph only of y equals f of x for x greater than or equal to 0, as shown here. And then reflect this in the y-axis, as shown here. Let's take a look at an example. Pause the video and have a go. Press play when you're ready to view the solutions. Let's begin with example 1 part A first. Let f of x equal x squared plus 4x minus 5. We are required to sketch the graph of y equals f of x. So let's solve this. F of x can be factorized to give f of x equals x plus 5 times x minus 1. Therefore, the graph of y equals f of x will look something like this. Now let's have a go at solving part B. We are required to sketch y equals f of mod x. Again, we are required to begin with a sketch of y equals f of x, but only for the region for x greater than or equal to 0, as shown here. We then reflect this in the y-axis, as shown in the graph on the right-hand side. Here's the point 1, 0, and here's the point 0, minus 5. These both remain as they are. In the reflected part of the graph, we have this additional point that you can see here, minus 1, 0. This is a reflection of 1, 0. For part C, we're required to sketch the graph of y equals mod f of x. So let's solve this. Again, we're required to sketch the graph of y equals f of x first, as shown on your screen. And then reflect the parts where f of x is less than 0 in the x-axis. So here's y equals f of x. And here's the part where we've reflected the bit below the x-axis in the x-axis. And of course we've deleted the parts below the x-axis. Now let's have a go at another example. Pause the video and have a go. Press play when you're ready to view the solutions. So let's solve part A first. The diagram shows the graph of y equals f of x with 6 points labelled. Sketch y equals f of mod x, labelling the corresponding points. So let's solve this. We begin by sketching the graph of y equals f of x for x greater than or equal to 0, as shown here. Then the part of the curve to the right of the y-axis is reflected in the y-axis, as shown here. And here are the corresponding points. And now for part B. We are required to sketch y equals mod of f of x, labelling the corresponding points. So let's solve this. The parts of the curve below the x-axis are reflected in the x-axis, as shown here. And of course we've deleted the parts below the x-axis, as shown here. This brings us to the end of this session. If you have understood its contents, you should be able to sketch the graphs of y equals mod f of x and y equals f of mod x. Thank you very much for listening. To understand this topic in greater depth, do attempt the exercises in your textbook related to this topic.